Water History. Gary, we got a special guest. Who are we talking to today?
Yeah, we're honored to have Kennedy Hall. In fact, we're so honored that I was dueling with Anthony Abade of Avoiding Babylon. He's having Joshua Charles on tonight. And I said, well, we have Kennedy, so it's going to be a duel of the Catholic podcasts. And ours is much more anarcho-capitalist and libertarian than theirs. So we'll see how this goes. Let me give Kennedy an introduction and bio. Kennedy Hall is a Catholic educator, author, podcaster, and defender of the apostolic faith of the apostolic faith, come Pope Francis or high water. He holds a special distinction, one shared by yours truly, of getting fired, dismissed from an ostensibly Catholic school for the ignominious crime of actually being Catholic. Since his providential liberation, Kennedy Hall has been busy growing his family and scope as a prodigious apologist for traditional Catholicism and especially the Society of St. Pius X. He does this through his published works, which can be found in Crisis Magazine, on LifeSite News, on 1 Peter 5, and his own website, which is Mere Tradition. He's authored 3 books. Especially important for today's discussion is his most recent SSPX, The Defense. Kenny Hall, we're blessed to have you on, man. Welcome to the Hot Water History Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me on, my friends. It's a real pleasure to be with a bunch of ingrates and degenerates such as yourself.
Yeah, this is the Degenerate Forum. The rejects come here.
That's
Yeah,
good.
both as hosts and guests. So hope you're. I feel like you're feeling comfortable already.
Great minds think alike and fools seldom differ. So I'm always in the right company.
Beautiful. Well, I want to start by going a little bit working backwards, and I want to touch upon something I spoke of in your bio, and that's namely, how do you consider that dismissal from the Catholic school in Ontario? Has that you see? I know you see that as providential. Um, but how much did that fuel your passion for the work you're doing now? I know you were doing that before as you were teaching, but if you could go into and then how that's fueled your passion for the work you do now, and then also your obvious respect and reverence that you have for Marcel Lefebvre and the society.
Sure. So in truth, I was never fired because I think you actually have to commit a crime to get fired as a teacher in Ontario.
Right.
Catholic schools here are technically public schools that are Catholic. So they're funded by the Ontario government, which means they're government schools with a cross on the wall. That's a long backstory. They used to be Catholic. Everything used to be Catholic that was Catholic, and then it wasn't anymore. Still just called itself as such. So I got to a point where I was in the position where I could essentially resign my license. I was actually in the same position Jordan Peterson's in. I
Okay.
just wasn't as famous. So no one knew about it, and I didn't do a GoFundMe or anything like that. But I was in the position where I could undergo sensitivity training after like a 2-year investigation, and then I could be unpaid for 3 months or whatever. But I saw the writing on the wall. So in 2020, after that school year had finished, obviously Canada was very severe with lockdowns and things, so we didn't actually go to the classroom after March break. Um, so the last time I taught was, the final online lesson of, June 2020. And then I just went on a sabbatical. You can just take that whenever you want. You can apply for that. You always get guaranteed. You keep your seniority, all those. And I wasn't sure what was going to happen. So I had released my book, Terror of Demons, which was very providential because it did very well. Self-published books are a gamble, but it was a good gamble. And I was able to basically take the year off because of that book. And then I just sort of realized, okay, um, there's no guarantees in this life as far as income and supporting your family, but it was a special kind of a little attaboy from God that it was like, listen, you can provide for your family. It's possible. And I saw that I could. So then I said, okay, I'm going to try to make this a thing. So I actually took like 2 years of these sabbaticals. So I was technically still under their auspices and I could come
Mm.
back if I wanted to. And then there was an investigation that started because I was a homophobe and a racist and a bigot and a white male and all these kinds of things. And
No company here.
exactly. So the last interaction I had with the system. So it was the Ontario College of Teachers. You all know how bureaucracies work. It's the government, but it's layers upon layers upon layers of nonsense. It's like Solzhenitsyn's wet dream.
Hmm.
And or I should say nightmare. That was the wrong analogy. And oh goodness, I hope my priest doesn't hear that. But so it was I sat in front of a Zoom call. This is November 2022. It was still too unsafe for the government employees to be in person, of course, because they only had 7 vaccines.
Right.
And I was told that and I had already resigned, but because I had technically committed these like thought crimes while I was a teacher, even though I'd resigned my license, and I was dealing with a lawyer that was given to me by my dues I had paid. She was very nice. And I still had to sit down and go through the Zoom court session, the Zoom tribunal or whatever, because when I had done them because of the Education Act in Ontario, I had to technically like atone for my sins with the people that were in charge of me while I sinned. So she told me, and this is a verbatim quote because I'll never forget this. Your beliefs supported by Catholic doctrine constituted abuse of your students. And I was teaching a Catholic school and I was teaching religion. But this is the Ontario government who technically is overseeing the system as a whole. So it's this gray area of, yes, the Catholic schools can operate. Yes, you can have your curriculum. Yes, it can be okay by the bishops, but you can't say anything that could constitute, abuse or whatever. It reminds me of in Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag Archipelago. He talks about whatever law it was, like Code 48 or whatever that number was. And it was something like aiding and abetting the enemy. And he goes through how everything was aiding and abetting the enemy. Like so-and-so has a prostitute who's technically German and they constitute that as aiding and abetting the German economy or something like that. And like they put him in jail. It's just, you can get him for anything. So back to sort of the original question is like, how did that sort of help with my zeal? Well, in 2019, my wife was having some like spiritual direction or counsel with one of our priests. And at that time, I had already been persecuted pretty heavily, and I was dealing with that, and I was actually kind of getting sick. I don't know if that's what you went through, but I mean, you can deal with the pressure, but it's a lot of pressure. And like I was getting ill, like I kept getting this strep throat over and over again. I couldn't get better. I was losing weight, and I knew I was exhausted, like mentally. I just was tired. And so Father Sherry, wonderful priest, and he basically said to my wife, he said, because she was saying, well, Father, there's a pension and all this kind of stuff. And he said, Brittany, you're just going to have to let that go because that's going to be the golden calf that's going to keep you there and you're going to whatever. And he said, Kennedy's either going to bend the knee and not be able to live with himself, which I don't want to do, or he's going to just become bitter and resentful and be relegated to teaching an online course in the broom closet. And then he's just going to become an alcoholic and a jerk, and that's really what would happen. He knew my personality. I don't know how to keep my mouth shut. It's not a virtue that I have. So I just was already thinking that I was going to get out. This is before COVID happened. So it just, God had other plans. And he said, no, you're going to get out now. And I was like, okay, I'm getting out now. So after that, it was just kind of like, well, I'm free. So I'm just going to say whatever I want. And so far, it's worked out well for me. And I thought, if I'm going to be a Catholic speaker and author, I should probably put myself into schism because that'll make sure that I get all the dates at all the men's conferences and all the diocesan events. And I go to the SSPX, and that was very practical in the beginning because my diocese was a wasteland. It was just literally the only thing. And I looked into it and I was like, oh, I'll go. It's fine. But then, I'm not I can't hide things that I think are good. I can't hide things that I believe in. I don't know how to do that, for better or for worse. So, I'd go on these podcasts and stuff, and I wasn't going to skirt around the issue and say, well, I attend the traditional mass, or, well, I go to a traditional community. It was like if somebody was going to bring it up, I was going to say it. So I just decided, I'm like, well, I've already been through this trying to skirt around the thing crap, and I don't like it. So I'm just going to cancel myself already, and then I'll know where I stand. And then from there, it's just become what it is now.
Beautiful. What are the biggest misconceptions that your ordinary, let's not say you're nominal Catholic, but more so your trad Catholic who's not as familiar or is just basically ignorant of the SSPX, what do they miss about it that you wish to highlight about it?
Well, there's 2 ways to answer that. So Dr. Kwasniewski, who is a good friend of mine and a very profound and prolific Catholic author, he just put out a book called Bound by Truth. It's very good. And I'm about 2/3 through. He also has a Substack where he did an article called something like SSPX and the Faithful in the Trenches or something like that. And he attends the Fraternity of St. Peter. He's very sympathetic. He's very pro SSPX in the sense that he doesn't believe anybody's schismatic or things. We disagree on certain things that are minor and non-essential, I guess. But nonetheless, he wrote this article saying it's fine to go. I mean, just this is you're in the trenches was the point. It's like this is a war and this is people on the right side sort of thing. But he had this sort of 6-point, I don't know if you call it like a logical syllogism, and basically it goes like this. When you're in a state of emergency, certain laws don't apply. That's just basic natural law. Like you're at war, okay, or the house is on fire. The law for jaywalking does not apply when you run across the street to get away from the fire.
Or certainly culpability is mitigated to a great degree.
Culpability is mitigated, but also like the decisions that one can make are completely different. So in certain circumstances, like it would actually be sinful to follow the law in the positive sense.
Yes.
If the situation required that, you ought not to because the law doesn't serve its purpose. That's just a basic concept of, the necessity of a situation.
Sure.
And then it was just like, listen, if that's the case, and then we find that church is in that state, then it means certain ecclesial laws can't apply in all circumstances. And then if the SSPX operates under that, and if it's true, then therefore, blah, blah, blah. That's kind of how you would have a state of necessity. This is sort of basic conception of it. So in that sense, it's like, first and foremost, when I talk to somebody about the society, if we believe we're in a crisis, well, then everyone's going to have to agree at a certain point that certain things are permissible that wouldn't otherwise be permissible. In general, maybe they say, well, my line's different than your line. It's kind of like conversations I used to have with people trying to convince them of traditional marriage. They'd say, well, I don't like the church's teaching on marriage. I said, oh, that's fine. So you think you can have 5 wives? And they'd say, well, no, that's bad. And I said, well, why? And they said, well, I'm okay with a husband and having 1 husband. I'm like, why not 10? They're like, well, that's not good. And I'm like, based on what standard? And I get to the point, I'd say, listen, you draw a line. I draw a line. I disagree on your line, but we both agree that there's a line. So marriage is a thing or it's not a thing. And then you can marry your cat if you want, because, that's the logical conclusion. So one may disagree about where the crisis would permit them to do certain things, but if they agree that there is a crisis, then they must necessarily agree that there are certain things that would be permissible that otherwise wouldn't be. So in that case, if someone disagrees with a certain stance of Archbishop Lefebvre or the society, fair enough. But if we agree that we're in a crisis, then we're going to have to give each other some leeway. Now, as far as sort of more the legalistic side of things, one of the biggest misconceptions is that the SSPX as such was excommunicated, which never actually happened.
Right.
Even if we grant that the excommunications of the bishops did happen, which I believe they were invalid, as many do, but even if we grant that they did happen, it didn't apply to the priests or the lay faithful. So it just didn't. So anything that could be applied to the letter from 1988, which has since been abrogated, but anything that could be applied to it, it just can't apply to the lay faithful or the priests. And since 2009, the decisions in 1988 have no juridical effect as per the congregation of whatever it was that dealt with it under Benedict. So at this point, I say to people, it's like, listen, you might think we're a bunch of meanie poo-poo heads, and that might be true. I mean, I'm probably a jerk, but you can't really go back past 2009 and argue from there, because if we're going by the letter of the law, those things don't apply anymore anyway. So I guess I would say the main misconception is that the SSPX per se was excommunicated, and that would have applied to the priests and the faithful.
Have you ever heard of the charge that the SSPX is to the right of the Catholic Church, what Jesuit casuistry is to the left? In other words, like, well, the circumstances so define the act that even previously understood intrinsic evils are null and void.
Yes, I've heard that it would apply if there were intrinsic evils that were committed. So, like, one thing I cover in my book, there was a bishop in the 1970s or 1970s who did exactly what Archbishop Lefebvre did, and he was made a cardinal by John Paul II. He was a Ukrainian Catholic patriarch in the Ukrainian Rite, in the Byzantine, And Paul VI had a strict policy of no consecrations of bishops in the Soviet Union for reasons of the Ostpolitik, don't poke the
Right.
bear.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically said to hell with that, and he went consecrated bishops. And he said because there was only like 2 bishops left in all of Ukraine, they were in their 80s or something, and he said, we will have no Ukrainian Catholic Church. That was his estimation, and everyone accepted it. He wasn't excommunicated or anything like that. Now, the argument from the contra side would be, the Ukrainian Byzantines have a different code of canon law, which is true, and it only counts as a suspension for them. But it also only counted as a suspension for the West until 1983. And before 1952, there wasn't even a specific code on it, and Pius XII changed it, which just demonstrates it can't be an intrinsic evil. Otherwise, under all circumstances, in all times in history, it would have always constituted some sort of schismatic act. But the difference is that even in our communist infiltrated church, at least the optics under Paul VI were, well, communism is probably a pretty good state of necessity. But the powers that be that allowed communism to infiltrate the church didn't think that Archbishop Lefebvre had a right to a state of necessity. But these things are subjective at the end of the day. So, yes, if there was, well, an intrinsic evil would be, but even here, in Kwasniewski's recent book, he talks about how during the Arian crisis, which I would argue ours is worse because we have all the heresies, and they had one. I wish we were dealing with just Arianism to be much simpler.
Right.
We have, I don't know if you've ever read Pascendi by Pius X.
Mm-mm.
So I'm writing a book on it right now for Sophia. And in English, we call it the synthesis of all heresies, modernism. Right. But that's because we don't have a word for what he used in Latin. And the word he used in Latin actually refers to the sewer underneath Rome, where all of the refuse. So it's actually the fecal repository of all heresies is what Pius X called it.
Wild too, because we have all these stories, including of Arius's final end of how he had a stroke and fell into the Alexandrian cesspool.
Yeah, he had a prolapse or whatever.
Yes,
and he died. Yeah,
went right into the sewer.
There was actually at a time a shrine to him where he died on the toilet. So they were venerating the heretic at a toilet, which I think is beautiful.
Yes.
But in the Arian crisis, I talked to Eric Sammons about this on the Crisis podcast a couple of years ago, and I was bringing this up, and he was like, man, I would have hated to have been a canon lawyer during the Arian crisis because it would have been impossible. And but at that time, you would have a diocese that would have 2 bishops who claimed to be the bishop. And one of them was appointed lawfully, but had become a heretic. The other one said, so-and-so has become a heretic. I have to be bishop of this place because you have no leader, because a heretic can't be your leader. So I'm just going to set myself up. And that's way further than Archbishop Lefebvre went. I mean, these guys were, and rightfully so. I mean, the heretics were bad. So there's, when we look through even the claim that to set up a bishop in a diocese would necessarily be schismatic. Well, in the Arian crisis, it wasn't, because now with the lens of history, we say it was that bad. Personally, I mean, I think sadly today, the St. Cardinal Supiches of the world, they might qualify for being a pretty bad leader of the flock and heretics themselves. But anyway, that's what I think.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you know this about me, but I was in the Dominicans for 3 years, and my religious name is Athanasius. So
Awesome.
I know Athanasian history. So I wouldn't say like the back of my hand, but if I was named after him, yeah, that's a good one. And to your point about self-appointment, I mean, his controversy with the imperially favored George when he came in, it was simply Athanasius wrote that he's proven himself to be outside the church and illicit bishop because he's espousing Arianism, or he was appointed through the corrupted vine, and that's an Arian bishop in Cappadocia or wherever. He came from Cappadocia. Yeah. So, it's not altogether unheard of, especially in time of crisis, that we have these episcopal appointments and claims of authority, and they're actually quite righteous claims of authority, because if there's not a righteous claim of authority, there's no authority in the see.
You know what's interesting? in a letter that Pope Paul VI wrote to Archbishop Lefebvre, he claimed that he was the first cleric to compare Archbishop Lefebvre to Athanasius, but negatively. So he said, you know, you present yourself as this Athanasius. And Archbishop Lefebvre replied, he said, I've never said that about myself. You're saying that about me. So it's kind of like in the Gospels of the Pharisees, and the demons recognize Christ as divine, but they don't like it. It was kind of like, what do you think you are, some Athanasius? And he's like, no, but you seem to.
And thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Yeah, that's great. What was his most outstanding characteristic? I mean, I've been reading more up on, through excerpts of your book, but also, just through general research. Other than steadfastness, which I think is his most, I suppose, obvious virtue, and fortitude. What stands out to you?
Prudence. And here's why. So I'm a member of the Third Order of the Society of St. Pius X. It's like any third order. We have, rule of life and all that kind of stuff. And once a month we attend meetings and benediction and mass and all that kind of stuff. And so we had a conference last Friday, actually, and he talked about the prudence of Archbishop Lefebvre, our chaplain did. And he explained to us that prudence being a virtue, it's not just a sentiment. So it's prudence basically means doing the thing that must be done, knowing all things that could be done. So it's imprudent or foolhardy to run into the field of battle without a weapon. If your fellow soldier is down, it's not imprudent to run out and get him without a weapon. So prudence, it encourages us or facilitates our right action when an action must take place. In our day, prudence has become basically a synonym for almost something like acedia or sloth. Well, he's not doing anything. He's being very prudent. It's like, that's actually, he might be being prudent. It might be
not
the
avoidance.
best course of action.
It's not avoidance.
That's right. So, I mean, when Archbishop Lefebvre died, just about 2 years after the consecrations, he had a very severe bowel cancer. And he had already felt, he had felt the effects of his age, and he was dying. He was old, mid-80s or whatever. He was born in 1905, I think. And in one of his letters, he had already negotiated with Ratzinger a number of times for consecrations, and they had 3 dates that they had actually had planned that weren't public, and they were asked by the Vatican to actually not do it and then talk again. And he did 3 times. And then he got to the point where he wrote a letter to one of his confreres, and he just said, I can't travel oceans anymore. I can't do this. I'm going to die. And so he decided to essentially, call the bluff. Okay, you asked me for a list of bishops. I've given a list of bishops. There's no reason. I mean, let's compare the crops of bishops we have. Right. I don't think that there would be any reason to reject any of the priests presented by Archbishop Lefebvre to the episcopacy if the standard is the episcopacy as we have it. So there was no good reason, is the point. I mean, were they too orthodox or something?
Right.
And they didn't care enough about their career. And so he just said, okay, and they agreed that the society could have, for psychological reasons, they said, this is how the modernists talk, they could have, for psychological reasons, they could have a bishop. And he said, you know what? I think we need 4, and we're going to do this on June 30th. And they said, oh, no, you have to wait till August 15th. And he's like, okay, fool me once, shame on you, et cetera, et cetera. And he said he's going to go through with it. And personally, I think it was an extremely prudential action because, as history has shown us, to this day, there has not been a single traditional Catholic bishop consecrated in the church except for those in the SSPX. Bishop Schneider's wonderful, but he went to Novus Ordo Seminary in his found tradition. Bishop Vitus Huander found tradition when he was the bishop of Chur in Switzerland or Austria, wherever it is. Now he lives with the SSPX with Rome's permission, and he actually celebrates mass for the school that he lives at and things, and he retired with them. Bishop Vigano obviously found tradition, but he just kind of writes letters. Bishop Strickland found tradition. He's not really traditionalist. Cardinal Burke, same thing, found tradition, but he's kind of inactive. And he was ordained in the Novus Ordo, or consecrated in the Novus Ordo. So I think that they were going to do traditional bishops and ensure there'd be traditional seminary formation, they would have done it, and they just never did. And the only reason they did it was because Archbishop Lefebvre did what he did, and I think that was some very supernatural insight. So I would say ultimately, I think it's his prudence, which people don't usually apply. They think he was hasty. I think it was the opposite. I think he waited till he was almost dead, and he said, "Well, prudentially, I must do it now, or it will never happen."
Sounds like a prudential, wise, and necessary thorn in the proper vine for the rest of the church. Do you see? You were talking about alternative bishops, those who like Burke have been ordained in the Novus Ordo, or like, is there a possibility that the crisis that is not just the Francis pontificate, but the last several, one could argue, bears fruit of some bishop? And who would that be that emerges that not just reconciles the SSPX in full for a recognition of full communion, but more so leads the church? It's a wild thing that we should be moving toward the thorn in the side, and instead it's feared with all of the energy that's left within the normie church. If you don't have a problem with that classification.
I know what you mean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I mean, even in the question, there's this concept of full communion. This is I've tried to find it, and I was told before I wrote the book by a critic of the SSPX. He said to me, well, in the past, there was this word full communion used in some letter or something to talk about the Orthodox rather than just coming into communion. And I really tried to find it. Like, I looked everywhere, and I've got lots of critics. I've got like a billion of them. I think John Salza dreams about me in his nightmares at night or something like that. And I've never had anyone throw the letter at me. And I asked people, I said, please, but I'll grant it. Let's just say at some point, but it's not the norm. This notion of full communion. The late great John Venari, the former chief editor of Catholic Family News, very learned man. He gets pegged as like this sort of journalist, and he was a journalist, but he was a brilliant man, and he was a heavyweight intellectually. He was like an encyclopedia of all these things, and he gave a talk. He called it Ecumenism, the original sin of the new mass, and he went through what was going on in the 1940s and 50s with this new brand of ecumenism, this idea of uniting with all the other Christian groups and things, and he showed that there was a ton of resistance to it by men that many people would know, like Monsignor Fenton, these very storied priests in the United States. But it kind of got buried. It wasn't in vogue after the council. But they insisted on this term full communion because these modernists, they don't really believe anybody goes to hell except for the SSPX. So, maybe Hitler and Archbishop Lefebvre there, but that's about it. Stalin's okay because he cared for the poor because he was a communist. And so the idea was that, well, if these separated groups don't have full communion, they have some communion. So they're still somehow part of the church. This was kind of the idea. And then with the council, I know that this word can be interpreted Orthodox for sure, but it can be interpreted unorthodox, is the word subsisted. That the Church of Christ subsists in the Catholic Church. There are two ways to interpret it, of course, but that's the point. There are two ways. It's ambiguous. And the story behind that word is it was a compromise. There was the modernists, the full modernists, who wanted to basically promote outright heresy. And then the fellow, I can't remember his name, but the story about it is in I Accused the Council by Lefebvre, and he just relays the minutes of all these meetings he was a part of, and all the interventions that the conservative bishops, they called themselves conservative at the time, not traditional. All the conservative bishops would say we can't do that. And anyway, he was on that group, and the individual who wrote the document or oversaw it made a compromise, and he said, well, subsisted is an Orthodox word in one sense, and the liberals will accept it, and it can be interpreted properly by the traditionalists, so we'll use this word anyway. But this idea is that well, the Lutherans, they don't have full communion, but because they have baptism, they have some communion. And this was half the thing is this is a partial truth, because even in the old it was called the Butler's Catechism, one of the good Irish catechisms. There's a condensed version of that in the SSPX prayer book called the Spiritual Warfare Prayer Book. And it talks about Protestants are baptized into the soul of the church, but not the body, because there's an enigma that they are baptized. There's only one baptism. You must necessarily be baptized as a Catholic because there's no other type of Christian in the technical sense. But once they reach the age of reason, they reject the church and therefore fall out of it. So there's this idea that they were baptized into it in an unconscious way, but rejected it in an active way. That's kind of the way they talked about it. And that was kind of as far as they went before the council. And that was from the 1800s. That was before modernism. Because it was a little bit of a mystery. So they played on this mystery. So historically, for communion, it's just necessary to believe that the authorities are the authorities, that the faith is the faith, and that the sacraments are the sacraments. You share in the sacraments, governance, faith, and sacraments. And just our reason would tell us that no one would necessarily have to obey everything an authority would always say in order to be in communion with that authority, because that's absurd, because they could do something wrong. But the point is that you recognize the authority as such. He is the bishop, he is the pope, and whatever. So that's that. The SSPX is kind of like, maybe it's like the exterminator. I don't know if the best example is the exterminator or the canary in the coal mine fumigator. Like, they lift up your couch and they shine a light and there's all the bugs. Nobody wants to see them. It's kind of the opposite. It's like they shine a light on the SSPX and they see their own bugs and they're like, ooh, they want to stay away from it because it's too much. So yeah, I mean, could there be a bishop that could sort of be a unifier? I mean, if there's anyone, it'd be someone like Bishop Schneider, because he's very affectionate of the SSPX, and he actually said mass at SSPX chapel last year when he was traveling. But the society has always said, it's not about the SSPX, it's about the church. The church must come back to tradition, because this experiment has failed. And tradition is there. We must embrace it. And people will say, well, when will the SSPX be normalized? And I said, it's not about the SSPX being normalized. It's about the church
normalizing unto itself.
Exactly. So when will that happen? I have no idea. It's going to take probably a top-down approach. It's going to have to be, like a St. Thomas Becket. He was kind of a scoundrel before he was ordained a bishop. And then the grace of the office, he becomes a saint. It's going to be something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I know I want to let Charlie ask you a couple questions, because I know he has less, I think more entertaining, if not as profound.
Is this where you guys tick me off?
No, not yet. I could save one for Gary, the one we talked about beforehand. I'm going to save for the Annoy Kennedy Hall segment.
Oh,
okay. I actually wanted you guys to both talk about, because I think me being kind of the guy that wasn't fired from a school.
Remember, he wasn't technically fired. He left of his own volition in Ontario.
You're right.
Yeah, I wasn't fired. I wasn't fired the same way the guy under the mafia wasn't fired from his business. He just had to close because he couldn't pay protection fee.
That's it. Yeah.
But hearing Kennedy talk about how he started to get sick towards the end, because Gary, you've talked about that before on here, and I think that's you don't have to talk about being sick for so long, but I think that hearing some of your guys, the similarities in both of your stories towards the end was really, really striking to me. Gary, I don't know if you want to, if Kennedy's even familiar with kind of how it got towards the end of, your teaching.
Well, yeah, speaking of sickness, I would just break out in like rashes and hives. And I think Charlie actually saw one time when my head and face would just break out. And it was from the stress of dealing with, you're in what is ostensibly a Catholic school, and one I attended, one that I had known as a place where at least a modicum of the faith was transferred and advocated for by those in authority. And the outright and very sudden, it was extraordinarily sudden how the shift came. And it was so remarkable that I mean, I could almost date it like 5 years before I left, where it, well, I would come home and my wife would say to me, and Kenny, you were recounting a story that was almost identical to one I had with my wife. She'd say, you have to get out. You're going to stay until you try to save the last student, or you try to help the last student. And they're not going to, they're just going to force you out. And I said, well, let that come as it may. But uh, then the dilemma comes, well, you have a wife and kids, and you're thinking, well, how am I going to support you? Right. So and you're right, Kennedy, it wasn't this bombardment, and the level of cowardice was so palpable on their end. They would never come and confront me and try to have a remediative debate, or try to, because as you said on previous interviews that I've seen with you and read from your recounting of it, it's like they had no case, unless they were just going to say and outright declare, we are no longer at all a Catholic school, even in the Catholic tradition, or whatever mealy mouth language they use. So then they obfuscate and they backbite. And then, as long as you get one or two students or faculty members that are constantly in the ear of the administration, you feel that constant pressure, no matter how much you might want to try to isolate yourself from it. It's always there. And then once you're recognized as the advocate for the students who are Orthodox and the ones who aren't insane racial Marxists or outright Leninists, they come to you, and you feel like, this is my role. This is what I have to do. I have to protect them at least. So it was spiritually taxing, as I think Kennedy recounted. You go ahead, buddy.
Yeah, it was very similar. And you come to a point where, the devil is a very cunning bastard, and he makes everything good bad. Can't create anything, so he just distorts things. And I can't remember where I heard it. It was some priest I was talking to or something, and it was like, listen, God doesn't need you to save souls. It's true. I actually can't save souls because I can't perform the sacraments. I guess baptism, an emergency or something, but normally speaking, no, I can't. So it's tragic that at this school, and I was a very successful rugby coach. I started a big program, and we were like, the equivalent of going to state championships every year and things. And we were very good. And I was the kind of coach, I was the kind of teacher that's in like the movies. Like I was picking kids up before school at 6 a.m. and they're broken home to make sure they got to practice and making sure they got to work after school. I was running clubs on lunch. I was doing all those things because I loved the students. And I miss it. I do miss it.
But as you know, the more you were successful and the more the students recognized your authentic charity, the more the hatred came, the more intense the hatred from those. The more you were recognized as a sublimely talented teacher, and one who was willing especially to think outside the Overton window and actually teach stuff. I mean, the fact that I would bring up things, Murray Rothbard, or this was so anathema and so outside. I mean, if you were just an ordinary kind of milquetoast boomer conservative, you got along fine, because as Michael Malice always says, conservatism is just progressivism going the speed limit. And so, and that's certainly true in the church.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and it's funny. The thing that I technically got dinged on had nothing to do with the classroom, because they never could pin anything. Funny enough, one time I was sitting in a meeting with my principal because someone had gone to the superintendent because I had said some atrocious things like demons existed and stuff.
Yeah.
And so I was always pretty diligent that I would make sure it was in the curriculum. Sometimes I would even record myself. Like I would say, a kid would ask me a question, I'd say, hold on. I'd take out my phone, I'd press record, then I'd answer. That actually came in handy one time because I was in trouble, not officially, but had to prove that I wasn't in trouble. And I played the recording, and my principal's like, yeah, you didn't do anything wrong, but the thing that I got dinged for was just from what's in my writings. Because there was nothing there was in Ontario, there's this thing called the Education Act, okay, it's like all things. There's a way to look at it, and it makes sense. So if you're a teacher, everything you do in like a public sense, you can be liable for as a professional, which I understand to a degree, because it's like if you have what's that stupid app? Where they do the prostitution and the pornography on it. What's it called? OnlyFans. Like if you're some famous like prostitute, that's probably not a good thing if you're teaching high school students. So like, even though you didn't break the law, they can kind of get you for like bad behavior
yeah, but in
things you
Ontario,
say.
don't you have the prosthetic, the guy with the prosthetic
Yes.
breasts?
Oh yeah, exactly. It's ridiculous. But what they got me for was, in my writings in my Terror of Demons book, I didn't even say anything about trans people, but I talked about like virtue, and I said male and female are perfections, and they said that was actually like abusive to trans students. So it wasn't even, like I didn't even say it anyway. But I would get sick, yeah, by the end, specifically in like June of 2020. My book came out May 1st of that year. And then there was this former student of mine who I think is gay. And this other kid who wasn't a student of mine, but was gay and hated me because he's just like a radical rainbow guy. And they made this like big Facebook thing in the town, and like got, petition and all this whatever crazy stuff. And anyway, I got the trustees were meeting about me and all these sorts of things. And I remember one day I just got hit with this insane fatigue where I felt like I couldn't even move, and I had to do something that day. I had like 17 coffees. Like I was just like, what has happened to me? And then the next day I woke up and I was shivering. It was like, I didn't actually have any flu symptoms. Like I didn't have a headache, or I didn't have any cold, or I didn't cough or sore throat or anything. But for like almost a week, I was basically like having bowel problems, and I was, my temperature was weird in my body, and I was sweating, and I was shaking, and I was like literally in bed, and I'd be like shaking like this because like I couldn't get warm. And this was in July. And then it just eventually went away. But it was like, I look back now and like, it was just a stress induced illness. Like no one was sick in my household. Nothing. It was just, my body just broke down because I had internalized all the stress for so long, I think. Yeah.
Wonderful recruitment video we're doing for teaching in
it's good, kids, get in the profession. It's a weight loss regimen, because eventually you get so sick you can't eat, and then you lose weight.
That's right. And if you want to eat alone all the time at lunch, so can't go in the faculty lounge. So if you're
I didn't do that for like 3
or
4 years. At the end of it, I couldn't do it.
Yeah. Oh no, I wouldn't step in it. No. So did we answer your question there, Charles?
We did.
Yeah. I mean, it must have been weird thinking, well, why is Rich-Eyed breaking out in hives up there?
Yeah, you had like worse acne than like half the students for a little bit there.
I never, even when I was a teen, I never suffered from acne. I mean, I had that rosacea and everything. They call it the Irishman's disease. They're just gonna have to rename it the Orthodox Catholic teacher's disease.
I think it's a drink. I think the Irish are trying to be nice to themselves. I think it comes from drinking.
Yeah, well, that can take place. Yeah. But well, you want to have some fun now? Not that we weren't having fun before, but I think we're gonna have more fun now. We're gonna do our segment of Get Our Guest Annoyed featuring Kennedy Hall. It was wildly successful with Trevor Alcorn, so we'll see how it goes here. So the way the segment works is, as Kennedy already knows, is I'm gonna state maybe 5 or 6 rather seemingly random things, but the whole idea is that Kennedy's gonna give a number of 1 to 10. 10 being annoying to the point of justified homicide against someone, and then 1 to the point of minor vexation. And then he can riff on how annoying just this thing is. And I'm going to just sort of stand by until we're also going to get Charlie's opinion too. Charlie's like our kind of placebo to see where we are straight.
The sugar pill.
Yeah, the sugar pill. That's it. All right, Kennedy. First one, since he's in the news. Cardinal Dolan.
11. Oh my goodness. Yeah. I mean, what happened in that cathedral in New York? I don't have words. Like I did a show on it, and the show was called "It's Official: The Pope and the Bishops Have Lost Their Minds." Like, it's just it's a form of insanity. What's happening? I'm not saying it's not intentional. I'm just saying the insanity is so deep that it's just like, how did it get scheduled? How did it get to the point where the priest beforehand had to be told last minute not to do a mass? Why was a mass scheduled? There's a room full of crazy people that are all there with signs and stuff. It's like a professional famous prostitute who's like an atheist and a transgender person. Like, it's just, it's you know what? It's a 10, but at the same time it's a 0, because I'm not shocked by it, because
Right.
it's just like, why would I be? But at the same time, like, if I'm being sober about it, it's mind-boggling.
Right. Well, Dolan really drew my ire way back when I see him yucking it up at these Al Smith dinners with, I don't know if how familiar
Yeah.
you are with the presidential dinners, and he's sitting there with these murderous, genocidal, corrupt
Yeah.
plutocrats, and everything's a joke, even though nothing's funny. And you're yucking it up. It's like, do you not understand? This is the inversion of the countercultural church. You're buying into the worst of the culture, your worst of the system, the worst of the establishment, and you're just sitting there giving your essential imprimatur by presence among those thieves and murderers. Charlie,
I
Cardinal
love.
Dolan,
9. And
9.
the only reason it's not a 10 is kind of what Kennedy was saying. It seems a little more like just being incompetent and dumb, as opposed to just pure planning it out. So that's the only reason it's not a 10 for me. But
I would almost define it not as dumb. It's like this insane heresy through Irenicism. Now, Irenicism is just that it's a vice of just letting things go.
Hmm.
It comes from the Greek word for peace, but it's like a malignant peace, an
Yeah.
inactivity, a kind of moral sloth that doesn't allow you to respond to patent evil. And
Yeah.
that's the elixir upon which all these bishops and invertebrate priests are drinking on a daily basis.
Yeah.
All right, here's a better one. Maybe you could answer this better than I think you could answer this better than Charlie as a Canadian. That's just Quebec.
Oh, uh, oh, I love Quebec on the
Oh,
one
beautiful.
hand.
So it'd be like a negative,
I was a French teacher.
-1. Oh, me too.
Yeah. Really?
Me.
I'm not French Canadian. People think I'm just Canadian and I speak
Right.
French.
Oh,
So like, and my favorite hockey team is the Montreal Canadiens. Um, and my favorite player of all time was Maurice Richard. He was the Babe
Rocket
Ruth.
Richard,
Yeah, Babe
number
Ruth in
9.
the sense that old, oh, yeah, exactly, old era. There's a beautiful film made about him actually called The Rocket. Um, and it's actually a bilingual film in the sense that it's like they naturally show there's English and French. There's subtitles. When the only part I don't like about it is at the beginning, because it's, artists, these lefties probably made it. But there was a politician in Quebec who was named Maurice Duplessis, and he was amazing in the sense that he was like a Salazar from Portugal, in the sense that he he really did give the rights of Christ the King in that province. Like, they were really rocking with the faith and stuff. But the Trudeau's dad was actually at the heart of the Quiet Revolution, so called. It wasn't quiet, but they call it that. And so as soon as Maurice Duplessis died, they started calling that era La Noirceur, the darkness, because the Dark Ages. What else would you call it, right? It's the Catholic times. So they call it the bad time. So they show at the beginning like the plight of the French Canadians, like they have this hard life, and they call it. It's like the first thing is like La Noirceur, and it's like Maurice Richard's working in this like steel mill or something. Really, it was tough for most French Canadian peasants, but that was more of an Anglo Protestant versus Catholic subjugation thing, which had nothing to do with the premier. But anyway, so Quebec, now it's an insane crap hole full of insane people who should be in a rubber room who run that province. But I guess on the one hand, I love Quebec. On the other hand, it's like a 10.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Love, hate, the architecture, culture, the history. The other thing too, you were talking about how in the supposed dark age of Catholicism and Catholic culture dominating when Maurice Richard is working in a steel mill. It's like everyone is guilty of the sin of presentism and think, oh well, he could have been an English teacher or a French teacher, or he could have been reading I don't know, Boris Vian to students. It's like, no, the alternative is he's tapping maple trees for syrup out in the wilderness and fighting off wolves. I mean, what
Yeah.
is this? So Charlie, any thoughts about Quebec?
No, my parents were there. They liked it, but
Okay,
I've never been there. So
there you go.
I don't know.
And the Winter Carnival's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have a drink called caribou. Have you heard of that?
No.
So it's very cold, obviously, in Quebec. Where I'm in Ontario, I'm in southwestern Ontario near Lake Huron. So we having a weird balmy winter this year with El Nino and all this kind of stuff. They call it global warming. They used to call it El Nino. And so we've had some big snow dumps and things, but we've like right now outside I'm looking out my window and it's dry and it's all melted again, and we had some snow went away. But Quebec never gets that. Quebec's always frozen. And so it's like minus 40 Celsius, which is pretty much the same in Fahrenheit, at the time of Carnival. And so they have this drink called caribou, and it's basically a mix of like mulled wine that's really sweet with whiskey. And while you're outside and it's really cold, you want to warm up. So people come around with these like big chalices and like goblets of it, and you just give people drinks of it. But there's a phenomenon that happens. You don't realize it's hit you because your blood is such a different state when you're in cold and hot. And so you don't get intoxicated when you're extremely cold. So you think you're fine. And then you walk into the room where there's got the fire on and they're singing the songs and things, and people just fall over because they just like they become blackout drunk within like 5 seconds, and they just fall on the floor. And that's from the caribou.
That's when it kicks in.
Yeah.
Let me go for the next one, Richard.
All right, go ahead, Charlie.
Joe Rogan.
A 10.
All right, you got to riff on that one.
I can't stand that bastard. So I used to listen to Joe Rogan all the time. So I was not a practicing Catholic growing up. I didn't start practicing my faith until I had a sort of radical conversion in my mid-20s. I was baptized, but I just didn't practice. We didn't practice as a family. And then, so I was a little bit faithful in my youth. Like I believed in God, and I would pray sometimes. And, I had some things where I was like, yeah, God's real. I believe in Jesus and that sort of thing. But then after university, I was really smart because I went to university, which meant I was smarter than everybody. So I realized religion was just a sham, because of course it is, because I'm so smart.
Right.
And something happened, and I was a prideful jerk. And so I basically that was like the first time in my life where like I intentionally rejected my faith. I didn't practice it beforehand, but I didn't reject it. It was just, I was apathetic. So I started, looking for answers, as you do. And I found Joe Rogan because I was working some labor job in between school semesters or whatever, and I wanted to listen to something. And so I listened to a ton of Rogan for 2 or 3 years, like every day. I never did ayahuasca or anything like that, but I would have. Like I was listening to him all the time. And then when I had a big conversion in Mexico at Our Lady of Guadalupe, I was on a mission with some students. At that point, I was kind of like a liberal Catholic. Like I was going to mass, but I was sometimes listening to James Martin talks on YouTube. This is before he was super gay. He was kind of like just kind of a liberal,
Just
but now he's
gay.
like
you read In Good Company, and you're like, he's bathing old Jamaican men.
Yeah.
Maybe something's going on here. I don't get it, but
he was low key gay at that time. But anyway, and then I went to Mexico, and I don't pretend to be a mystic or anything like that, but like we were praying, and we were in the garbage dump with the poorest of the poor, the whole thing. We were very emotional, lots of rosaries. Like it was a change, it was an interior change. And I remember saying to my friend, she's the godmother of one of my children. And I just said to her, I said, and I'd never talked like this in my life. I never said anything in my life like, I think God's telling me. I didn't talk like that. And I said, I think God is telling me to stop listening to Joe Rogan. And because he'd already been ticking me off by that point, because I was watching a lot of debates between atheists and theists, like John Lennox versus Richard Dawkins, those kind of things. And so atheists were already starting to bug me because these were so stupid. But I still was like not that moral in many ways, so I could still listen to a lot of the nonsense. And then I came back from Mexico. I went to a gym to work out after work one day, and I thought, wow, man, this God thing. I mean, I believe in God, but like, does God speak to me? So I turned on the podcast, and I kid you not, it just felt like sulfur in my ears, and I just turned it off. So since then, I've developed a really wonderful hatred for Joe Rogan. I think,
Is it because
like
he's
some people,
non-committal on anything? Is he's just like non-committal on anything of importance?
it's because he's really dumb. Like, he's not smart,
No.
and people they look to him like a philosopher, and I think he's a nice person, probably. He seems like a
Yeah.
nice guy,
Mm-hmm.
but he's just like the he's the worst person possible from a perspective of truth to be in his position. He has all the characteristics of being a good interviewer and all the niceties and things, but his arguments against religion are so dumb. I want to claw my eyes out when he talks about them. I haven't listened to him in years. I had to listen to something for an article I'd write for LifeSite. He had like Malone on or Dr. McCullough or something like that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he was fine because he just asked them questions about COVID. But when he talks about anything of substance, it's just like,
Yeah.
I just want to kill myself. So anyway, I don't like Joe Rogan.
Charlie, what are you on What are you on Joe Rogan?
I don't know. After that, it's a little higher, I think, because you kind of realize it.
Convince me.
You're kind of realizing it as you go. But
All right, here you ready
I've
for the
never.
next one?
I got the high score right now, Richard. That's all. That's all I
You
wanted
got
to
the high
say.
score. Okay, yeah, you got it. Okay, wait, but this one's gonna be good. I'm gonna stretch it a little bit. All right, Pope Francis wearing an Indian headdress and still not apologizing for the apology for the non-crisis at the Indian schools.
Hmm. The headdress part actually doesn't bother me because there actually was a picture of Paul VI wearing a headdress visiting the natives in like the headdress is a crown. It's
Mm-hmm.
not actually a pagan symbol. So that like it bugs me in the context, but it doesn't bother me in itself because those sorts of things have been done in the past.
Not Pachamama.
No, it's literally just a crown. Like I
Right.
mean, it's a crown.
Yeah.
Fine. There's that picture of Sitting Bull, a famous picture where they always crop out the crucifix. He's a famous native leader in the United States, and he's got this massive crucifix. But he's in church and he's got his headdress and stuff. And that was actually, you might even say this word enculturation is such a bastardized word, but it was like that was their custom and that was fine.
Right.
I don't have a problem with that. I really don't.
No.
The residential school thing though is like a 55 out of 10. It bugs me so much.
Yeah.
Our men's conference we just had is called the Canadian Martyrs Men's Conference. And so we actually had a first class relic of Saint Jean de Brébeuf. We had like a piece of his bone there at the conference, you know. I live in Huron County, Ontario, which is named after Huronia. My kids go to the Canadian Martyrs summer camp every summer, and they go to an old scout camp where if you search deep enough into the forest, you can actually find old rocks that were used as altars by the Jesuits who were evangelizing the natives. I love the history of Catholic priests in Canada. They are some of the most heroic, magnificent men who've ever lived, and the stuff they've done to sully their name is just it's the complete work of the devil. Those residential schools were a blessing. Um, they were they lie through their teeth about them. This lie they couldn't speak their language and things. That's not even true. They had literally like there's records of this. I did a show on this with a historian who debunked it, a good Catholic guy, and they had like, you know, the Blackfoot elder would come in to do the interpreting for the parents when they'd come and for their Christmas pageant stuff. Like these natives were devout Catholics, like all converted pagans, and they love the faith and they love the Lord and they love the priests. And so I really hate what they've done, but the headdress itself doesn't bother me.
Cool. Charlie? I mean, you had that pilgrimage for the of
Yeah.
the Canadian Martyrs in New York.
Yeah. So I don't like that stuff either. I'm probably at a 9 again.
Yeah. And just for reference, Kennedy, there's a new piece that's coming out from the Fraser Institute called Grave Air. How the media misled us and the truth about residential schools by CP Champion and Tom Flanagan. So
yeah, I saw something about that. Yeah.
It came out on Valentine's Day. So yeah, and there of course no body has been found. Not one. It's absurd.
No.
And then of course the church is burning because all the radicals went out and burned the churches.
Here's the problem though. They will debunk the myths of the mass graves, but they will not touch the false accusations about abuse. That's where they won't. I'm sure it'll be good in some sense,
All right.
but they will not do that because everyone in sort of secular academia and the intellectual world is still under this kind of Rousseauian myth that although the priests weren't evil and weren't murderers, it was really bad that they got rid of their culture, kind of thing. Like they'll never read a diary of Isaac Jogues or Jean de Brébeuf saying, the children are so malnourished that they have handicaps.
Right.
And the women are used as sled dogs. It's true.
Right.
And they practice infanticide. And the Catholic priests taught them farming and to not murder their children. They'll never say that.
Right.
That's the next layer that they need to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Next one is Jon Stewart or anyone who ever thought Jon Stewart was funny.
Is that the guy who calls himself a comedian?
Yeah. The guy who does he's back on the Daily Show.
Is he back on?
Yeah.
I haven't watched that stuff in a long time. You know, he bothers me like an 8 because he's really annoying. But he's got enough of the sort of like 90s SNL sensibilities in him that he'll say things like kind of like Jerry Seinfeld.
Yeah.
Like Jerry Seinfeld got annoyed with people for saying he was homophobic. And he was like, shut up with your gay. You know how he talks. Like, shut up with what is this gay? Like, I'm making jokes. Shut up. You know, Jon Stewart has enough of that in him, but he's pretty annoying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's really going hardcore on, if you saw the last thing well, you haven't seen, but if you do happen to look at it, he's really going after Tucker for interviewing Vladimir Putin. He's just calling him an apologist and stuff like that. But of course, Jon Stewart always puts himself up as this rogue anti-establishment figure when he's just getting talking points, just like Joy Reid or anyone else. So Charlie, Jon Stewart,
Or anyone who finds Jon Stewart funny.
correct.
6.
Okay, you found him funny. You can admit it. You're a Jon Stewart fan.
He was pretty good during COVID. Surprisingly, he was above a lot of the deep state with all that
just because
stuff.
he came out and questioned.
Look, it's a 1 to 10 scale, man. I got stuff at 9, and like Jon Stewart's not even close to the stuff I put at 9, so I can't.
Yeah.
I gotta keep it there.
All right. Second to last one. People who insist that Ghostbusters is not a great libertarian movie.
I've never heard that before.
I've never seen Ghostbusters.
You've
Like the
never seen?
original?
Okay, well, Charlie's out because that's first of all, that's criminal. That is the original Ghostbusters is a fantastic movie, but it's a thoroughly libertarian movie, and if you've seen it and you don't get it, then you're missing the point. Kennedy,
I haven't seen it in a long time. Why is that?
Here's my points. Okay, first of all, it's showing New York and it's like 1980s glory, like the city's being reestablished. You got beautiful architecture. It highlights all the beauty of New York, and it's like 1980s, but it's also features all this Art Deco. And then what happens? You have this band of actually like practical scientists going out to solve a problem, and their constant frustration is the government.
I see.
Like the Walter Peck guy is the one that releases the ghosts and causes the havoc and causes the apocalypse. And then the funniest scene in the movie is when they go into the mayor's office and Walter Peck, they're asking Dan Aykroyd's character, Spangler, or no, it wasn't Spangler, it was the other guy. He's like, well, what's the problem here? Why are all these ghosts out there? And he goes, well, everything was fine until Dickless here unloaded the grid. And then they go, is this true? And Bill Murray's character, Peter Venkman, goes, yes, it is true. This man has no dick. And they start fighting. It's just like the best. And there's a card. If you remember, Kenny, there's the Archbishop Cardinal of New York comes in, and the mayor kisses his ring, and everybody rolls their eyes at all of this because it was like this bishop was perfect for today because he's like, well, the church doesn't have an official position here, but I think we should all pray. And everyone's like, what the, so that sort of thing. So it is a thoroughly like libertarian movie in my opinion.
You know what's a libertarian themed movie in that sense then is the Paw Patrol movie. I have lots of little children.
Mm-hmm.
So the government's trying to control the weather. The mayor uses the local university to try to control the weather, and the pups save the day because it creates this superstorm. and he does it for political power. And then the pups, who are, I don't know, private security or something, whatever you want to
Yeah,
call them, they're
yeah,
just,
yeah.
I don't know how they're funded. They
They're the
come in and they
Pinkertons.
save it. They come in and save it.
Nice. I'll have to watch that Paw Patrol movie. All right, here's the last one.
Sure.
The Conservative Party of Canada, especially Pierre Poilievre.
Okay, on the one sense, it's like abomination of desolation. If I'm being, if I'm taking it in context of what is possible and doable in the Canadian political system, like a 5.
Yeah.
Poilievre is, I don't know what the equivalent would be in America. He's not a Trump,
No.
but he's closer to a Trump than a Paul Ryan.
Yeah.
Because he's not never going to say anything to tick people off and just be like the white bread kind of, look at me, I'm a conservative. He
Right.
does do the whole like, I'm going to go talk to the people thing. He seems genuine. Like when he goes into, and we have a conservative premier of Ontario, is Rob Ford, that mayor of Toronto. He's his brother.
Yeah, he was
He's
the
the
guy.
worst.
Yeah, he was the
Rob
drug
Ford was
guy,
great. Yeah,
right?
Rob Ford was just like, he was a troubled soul, but he was legitimately kind of an awesome dude. And like,
Yeah.
he like literally told his employees, he's like, you get no more free bus. It's like $150 a month for the transit pass in Toronto, because whatever. And he's like, you make 150 grand a year, like you don't get this
Yes.
anymore. He
Right.
was awesome like that.
Mm-hmm.
He did things like he brought in sponsors for parks, and then all the liberals were like, what are you doing? They have Coca-Cola's on the sign. He's like, there's no more needles. Shut up. Like he was good. But he had demons, and he was very, very overweight in like a weird way, and like had problems with food, but he had problems, but God rest his soul. His brother is actually, I know someone who knew Rob Ford really well. I interviewed him, and when Rob Ford was dying, he said, be careful of my brother. He's a pinko. He's a communist. And Rob Ford is just a Trudeau lackey, but he pretends to be his brother. So when Doug Ford goes, he's our current premier. When he goes to like a plant and puts on a hard hat, it's like, you look like you're the village people and an idiot. Whereas when Poilievre goes into a plant and puts on a hard hat, for some reason, it's like, oh, he actually kind of is a regular person. So I don't hate Poilievre. Sorry, go on.
Yeah. Unlike our president, he puts it on the right way. You see that picture of Biden? He put it on backwards.
I think they put one on Biden because they're worried he'll fall. But so Poilievre, like, he was raised by Catholic parents, Catholic school teacher, but like his dad has a husband now.
Oh.
So I mean, like, in the sense of, I'm being compassionate, like he was raised by who he was raised by. So like, he's never going to speak out against the gay thing, but he is starting to speak out against the trans thing. And he just said something like, it's pretty simple. There should be no biological males in women's bathrooms or change rooms or on sports teams, which is like, that seems so obvious, but in Canada, where you burn churches down,
Sure,
that's actually kind of a courageous thing to say.
Mm-hmm.
But then the Conservative Party itself, it's tough because Canada has no culture war on a political level, and it never has. Now, it's very English, and so it was actually kind of nice because, like, English culture is historically run by custom, So politics would be basically where you would instantiate what was custom into law, which actually does make a lot of sense in the common law tradition. So, like, things like abortion and gay marriage and stuff, they weren't talked about in Parliament because it was like, we don't talk about people's business that way, which is from a virtuous kind of customary standpoint. But the liberals have taken that and run with it. And then, so because there's no resistance, they just do whatever they want. So Poilievre is in an interesting position because his party is filled with, a lot of Mitt Romney types.
Yeah.
But he's closer to a Trump than not. So
good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Know.
That's hopeful. Charlie, I won't even get your rating on that because you're not dabbling in
yeah, that's like Quebec
politics in your free time.
Yeah.
So that's Charlie, do you have another one for Kenny? Because I know we're gonna have to get on to
we gotta get to the people's favorite segment.
But before we get to the people's favorite segment, we barely touched upon at the close of this segment. This is no more annoying for you, Kennedy. But I mean, I know that in the sphere of Catholic podcasters and people whom we're in conversation with all the time, I'm seen as the outlier because I'm an ANCAP and yet Catholic. Everybody just kind of looks askance at me like, what, that's impossible. And I know you're more of a libertarian, at least as I've been told. Are you on the minarchist side of things? Or are you on the ANCAP side of things, or just anarchist side of things? Where are you?
So you minarchist, you mean like kind of like the Night Watchman theory about economics sort of thing?
Well, just minarchist that, yeah, that a bit of that, or just that the government can exist. It has a right to exist. It just has to be as small as possible and yet functional.
Yeah, that's, people ask me like, what is your political views? And I'm like, well, read a bunch of Thomas Sowell and I'll probably agree with most of it,
Oh, okay.
He's not perfect. I know no one is, but yeah, like I wrote an article. I probably got a lot of crap for it. But I wrote an article for 1 Peter 5 called The Catholic Libertarian Monarchy. And I know it sounds so silly in a sense, but I was trying to show the point that, like, I'm a huge Chesterton fan. Like I adore G.K. Chesterton. And so I've read a lot of distributive stuff. And I agree with them on like a lot of their, like, on a lot of their stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But
he went way too far on that one. Don't you think?
well, I also think they were just wrong on I think they're wrong in
They're wrong on
economics.
economics. Yeah.
Like
He and
Hilaire
Belloc were
Belloc.
wrong.
They're wrong. And even what's his name? Joseph Pierce admitted, like, the labor theory of value just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
It just doesn't work. Now, in fairness, if you're kind of a medievalist, and there's a sense where the longer you spend on something, probably the more value it is, because it's all made by human hands, that sort of thing. So like, I get why they would get there, and I think that they were trying to appeal to the communists, but it just was wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But my point what I try to say to people is like, listen, if you're a sensible person and you recognize individuals have original sin, then you should want the fewest amount of people over top of you, because even if they're virtuous, there's a bad devil on one shoulder and a good devil on the other.
Right.
And I was trying to say in this article, like, if you're a medievalist and integralist and stuff, we probably agree on a lot of things. So let's just like look at the time where we all would say was like the glory days of Catholic, like Father Fahey, whose memory hold, but awesome. Father Fahey would talk about sort of the 1300s as being the glory of Catholic civilization. And it was. But I say, okay, so what is the government doing then?
Little to nothing.
Very, very little things. And it's like, they had a lot of authority, but they didn't have a lot of power. They're not the same thing.
Right.
So like, if I could like snap my fingers and say, what kind of society would I want to live in? I'd want little kingdoms of like 100,000 people, and with some politicians or kings or lords, whatever, with some skin in the game. They own their stuff. That's one thing. Even the British monarchy today, they pay the government to pay them back, like, as bad as we can, whatever, but they actually only take 20% of the money that their estate earns, and they give 100% to the government gives 20 back, and that funds their whole thing. So even the globalist, Freemason, whatever side of the British monarchy, even they are more moral with how they are funded than like your average democratically elected politician, because they actually pay their own salary from their own private property. Right. So yeah, I want things to be really small. I want people to stop telling me what to do unless they're a good person. I want there to be fewer offices of government. And I don't want to be paying any more taxes.
Excellent. You know what place on the map of Illinois resembles nothing of one of those independent voluntarist Liechtensteins? Oak Park, Illinois.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
Okay. This is Meanwhile in Oak Park, featuring Kennedy Hall. We've just got one story today. I'm curious to hear Kennedy's take. We're going to have to give him some of the backstory here, or context. Oak Park selects St. Edmund's School as asylum seekers shelter. In a two-part vote, a split Oak Park Village Board of Trustees approved separate agreements to provide a new shelter space at St. Edmund's School for asylum seekers. The new shelter will be operational from February 26th until June 30th. Migrants staying at the West Cook YMCA and the Carlton of Oak Park Hotel will be able to transition to St. Edmund between February 26th and February 29th. The school, located at 200 South Oak Park Ave, has most recently been the site of the Catholic Parishes of Oak Park's migrant ministry. The ministry has been providing clothes, snacks, and other necessities. As part of the $1.9 million Supporting Municipalities for Asylum Seekers Services grant, roughly $1.24 million has been allocated for operating this temporary shelter. The village board's special meeting February 15th was held to determine an operating and a lease agreement to facilitate shelter at St. Edmund. Okay, so let's backtrack right there a little bit. 1.2, I didn't know, we didn't know this, Richard. 1.24 of the 1.9 million grant is going to cover February 26th until June 30th.
Well, it's amazing how this, well, I think this is where Kenny's going to go with it, but I'm going to let him riff on it in a moment. It's amazing how much the church is depending on this migrant crisis and benefiting from it. It's like, it's almost, there's this synergy that the churches are closed to the point where we're consolidating and closing all of these parishes. And then the remnant buildings are perfect migrant shelters because it's not like the energetic and orthodox preaching of Blaise Supich is drawing in tens of thousands into Holy Name Cathedral.
Well, we're going to get to him later in the article.
Oh, wow. Okay, there's commentary.
What's that notorious priest? Pretends to be black.
Father Flager.
Yeah, he pretends to be a black guy when he's preaching.
Yeah, he goes and he's just a shakedown artist. He goes and says he's going to boycott or he identifies that the beer companies are advertising in Chatham or in whatever Southside neighborhood, Auburn, Gresham. And so he just goes and leads a crowd out there and they protest until the beer company just concedes and gives him a $10,000 check and he goes home to St. Sabina. Same thing with the gun companies. That's his big thing. He'll go and protest in suburban or Northwest Indiana gun sales and manufacturing companies, and then they'll pay him off, and then that's his racket. It's a wonderful, wonderful Catholic living there.
You know what this all comes down to? This depending on the migrant crisis thing. Dr. Kwasniewski talks about what is the word, this word, which is such a volatile, or it's such a misunderstood word, the word of the common good. You know, there is this tradition in the church and in philosophy, what is the common good? And what it means is things that can be shared. And the more that they're shared, the more value they provide those and are never denigrated. So like, for example, like a great piece of art, Thomas Aquinas, is in the common good, meaning the more it never loses its value and it only increases the blessedness and the happiness of people who enjoy that thing. Right. The great music of Beethoven is part of the common good in the sense that it's common to all men because it's enjoyed by all and it's never diminished. But in the church, there's this understanding of the common good. They really confuse it with a more materialist notion of what we might call the public good. And so they weaponize this term that is a good term. The traditional liturgy is in the common good. It belongs to the common man. It belongs to the church. It doesn't belong just to the Pope because he's part of the church. It belongs to the church, and it only increases in value the more that it's shared. Whereas they view these things like they say common good, but really they mean public resource.
Right.
So they
want to make everything a utility.
That's right. So they get you to agree, like, well, isn't this part of the common good? Actually, it's not part of the common good. Even if I wanted to be, even if I wanted to put on an integralist cap, or like I wanted to be the most sort of heavy-handed government guy possible, I would still have to say that this basically pseudo welfare system thing is not part of the common good, because there's nothing about this that actually increases the good of those, in the sense that you would appeal to the common good. So it's just another one of these weaponized terms that's common in the church now.
And any mention of the modern sense of common good as we're referring to it, the nefarious common good that we're referring to, it vitiates any idea of consent. Whereas the traditional understanding was always that common good would be the buildup of some great edifice, work, art that would redound to the benefit of all. but yet, of course, it was through the consensual work or contribution of many, oftentimes, or a genius. So you could have the common good of the
Right.
Pietà, or you could have the common good of an aqueduct.
Yeah.
But the idea that you could have common good of this essentially perpetual welfare state that's fueled by fiat currency is just it's demonic.
And even the Caesar paid for the aqueducts. Like,
Right.
like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there was no such thing as income tax. So it's like, we don't have that many toll roads in Canada. They shake us down for a lot more money on our income tax. They don't need it. But when I drive through the States, it's like you go through Ohio, it's like $14 to get from one side to the other or something. That in theory, I have no problem with that. Like if the road is owned by somebody and I have to pay to use it, it's like, okay, I got to pay to buy a coffee. He's going to have to fix it. He's going to pay somebody. I don't have a problem with that. But in the ancient world, like even the cathedrals or whatever, these things were made by people who would personally, voluntarily give their money. The poor would sacrifice, and the rich, and there's in Germany, they have those things called the butter towers, right? Where they're back when Lent was really hardcore and it was basically like be a vegan plus fish and fast. They would allow a dispensation for you to eat dairy during Lent, but you had to make a significant contribution to the cathedral. So there's these cathedrals that, like, they call them a butter tower because it was built by these not buying indulgences, but paying for dispensation. Now that's anathema to the Lutheran who think, but the point is that no, you actually, like, it's going to hurt how much money you have to give.
True. Absolutely.
So I guess they love cheese, but, but even that, like that, again, that's still paid for by people who want that thing. And it's because they want to glorify God. Anyway, it's totally different.
Yep. Sure.
The operating agreement is with West Side Service Connector doing business as the Oak Park Family Transitional Shelter, which will manage the $1.24 million. The West Side Service Connector is an Illinois nonprofit organization that operates the new OPFTS. According to the village, the OPFTS submitted a proposal in November to operate a temporary shelter at St. Edmund. OPFTS will manage day-to-day operations of the shelter. The $1.24 million will fund personnel, food, supplies, security, translation, travel, and telecommunications. A bulk of the budget, $440,000, will be spent on food, according to OPFTS. The next highest categories are contractual services such as translation and security, personnel at $194,000, and shelter supplies. This is 3 months.
Incredible.
Can I just say, isn't it amazing the way the press talks and the government in cahoots with them? Talking about telecommunication, what they mean is they're going to have an internet connection.
Right.
It sounds so elaborate,
There'll be a guy with a cell phone and they're calling it telecommunication. It's like, doesn't everybody have a cell phone? Or like,
we hand them out at the border.
Yeah, interpreter services. It's like, you mean like the 800,000 people in the greater Chicago area who are bilingual in Spanish?
Yeah, exactly.
Like la abuela, she's the interpreter. Like, shut up, you like
the grandma's the interpreter. Yeah.
Yeah, but they won't. They'll use somebody from the government who isn't even good at speaking Spanish, but who got a degree in Spanish, and who is on a union who will come interpret. And they could literally just ask Buddy at like the local Rincon Latino who's selling like pupusas, at lunchtime. Right. Yeah. They could ask that guy to just come hang out and just help them talk.
I know. It's insane.
For free.
Yeah. Just for like a pat on the back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
the shelter will foster a supportive environment where residents are encouraged to take ownership of their journey towards stability, and will hold residents accountable for their path to permanent housing and employment, OPFTS said in its proposal. It's unclear whether the shelter would operate beyond June 30th, said Jack Crow. If all the migrants are able to move out early, the shelter will close. Crow said the OPFTS will work with the Oak Park Resettlement Task Force, an organization supported by the community of congregations that's working to find the asylum seekers stable housing. Jim Crow says, quote, "We will be an abject failure if in June there are still 100 people there." St. Edmund was selected as a shelter because of its ability to house between 80 and 120 individuals. Reverend Carl Morello has said the ministry would need to acquire bedding arrangements and a way to provide showers to host the asylum seekers. According to the OPFTS proposal, classrooms at St. Edmunds will be fitted with cots or sleeping mats. A shower truck will be provided at the back of the school, and residents will be given hygiene products. It keeps saying according to the proposal, which is I'm just not reading it as much anymore.
Yeah.
The OPFTS proposal also includes requirements residents must follow to stay there. For example, they must sign in and out between the hours of 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. Residents also must attend shelter English language classes for at least 5 hours a week, in addition to other roles. The board approved the operating agreement in a 4-3 vote with trustees Lucia Robinson, Corey Wesley, and our guy,
Ravi
Paracat, voting against it. Just a little
He's like
context
the-
there.
he's like
kind of
the-
yeah.
Ravi Paracat is like the pinko among thorough Leninists in this city council.
One of those, you said one of the guys' names was Jim Crow.
Yeah, I was amazed by that. I was going to say
That's
Jim
hilarious.
Crow. That is
That's
hilarious.
that's very on the nose.
Next month we're going to feature minstrel shows among the migrants.
Jack Crow. Did I say Jim?
Yeah, you said Jim Crow. Oh, here we go.
Yeah. Robert E. Lee is going to show up and give us a thing on diversity. No, Robert E. Lee was probably pretty legit. I never
He's
read
our
into it
guy.
too much.
No,
I think he was pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, here's where we get Catholic. Kinda.
Okay. Supich.
The lease agreement for the shelter is with the Catholic Bishop of Chicago, a nonprofit arm of the Archdiocese of Chicago. The
How about that?
The 1.24 million will also cover the CBC's self-insured property insurance premium and utilities. According to the village, the village will not have to pay the CBC for the shelter space, excluding the monthly insurance premium.
Isn't the whole Catholic Church nonprofit? How do they have a nonprofit arm?
Yeah. That's a good question. Well, you got to launder the money somehow.
Oh my goodness gracious.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, Supich is in the news. Did you see the other thing he was in the news for? Just as we're about to meet, and meanwhile in Oak Park, but he just came out and said that Traditionis Custodes regarding it, that the traditional Latin Mass, in quote, impoverishes the church.
Well, yeah, if you understand it in the complete opposite direction, he's telling the truth.
So again, they're masters of it at inversion, right, Kennedy? They're masters at inversion.
But hold on, isn't poverty good? Aren't we all materialists? So I mean that's good. Yeah, I mean we should all be more like the migrants and not we should only have Samsung Galaxy S20s for our telecommunication devices rather than 24s, and we could practice poverty like the migrants. So I think that's a good thing. Thank you, Supich, because I want to be more poor like the migrants.
Mm-hmm. It's a wonderful message.
Yeah.
And if we're gonna get really impoverished, let's just go all the way Francis of Assisi and Peter Claver, and let's just have Latin masses all over the place. I mean, there'll be a Latin mass on every corner of the city.
We'll be the poorest place around.
Yeah, materially we're getting there, but now just in ecclesial sense, we're gonna get there. Thanks to please Supich. But that was Charlie.
Wait, hold on.
Oh, there's more.
We're getting to that.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Right at the end. Robinson, Wesley, and Paracat voted against the lease agreement, but it still passed in a 4-3 vote. I don't know why they had to say that again, but at the February 15th meeting, the village board also approved in that same 4-3 vote an amendment to the SMAS grant application, asking for an additional $126,750. If approved, that brings the $1.9 million grant to roughly $2.07 million. The additional funds would allow the village to hire and train 3 full-time temporary employees to oversee shelter operations. Human Resources Director Kira Chang, said the 3 employees would allow for a 24-hour presence. Funds from the SMAS grant are restricted to meeting asylum seeker needs and can only be spent through June 30th. Final quote from trustee Brian Straw. He says, "This seems to be a both/and response, not an either or response."
Well, good to know that they have some profound thinkers on the board.
Is Cardinal Supic Croatian?
No, that's a good question. I think is he Croatian? I don't know.
I have a joke. I have a joke about Medjugorje anyway. Can I tell?
Go, yeah, yeah.
The Virgin Mary and I have a lot in common. Both of us have never been to Medjugorje.
That's a good, I like that one. That's a good one.
He's from Nebraska.
Yeah, but what is he
Supic.
ethnically?
Oh, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, Kennedy, what are you talking about? He's Nebraskan.
It's a good joke either way.
Yeah, it is a good joke either way.
Meanwhile in Oak Park.
Well, Kennedy, thanks so much for being on, man. We had a blast. I hope you had a good time.
I did. This
Yeah.
is fun.
Next time we're gonna get out. I don't know. I've been reading for the year, my New Year's resolution. I've never read Human Action by Louis von Mises from cover to cover. It's a real lacuna in my development. So this year I'm doing it, and I'm posting on my Twitter feed, Read Human Action. And I got some good quotes that sound exactly like Jesus, the Austrian Jewish economist who is generally an agnostic, sounds a lot like Jesus in his economics. So I hope people can follow me along with that hashtag Read Human Action. Otherwise, Charlie,
he was a friend of Dolphus.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, so Dolphus would have been Austria's Franco, let's say. He didn't win. He didn't end up taking over, but he actually employed Mises for his economic ideas because he thought they were compatible with sort of a sort of strong Catholic state.
Yeah, and if I ever get onto my next work, it'll be, how to be a good and cap Catholic, using a lot of Mises in that regard. So want to thank Kenny again, and also Kenny, why don't you promote yourself? I know you. Where can everyone find your work? At Mere Tradition?
Yeah, if they go to meretradition.substack, it's a Substack. But also just my YouTube channel. Like under my YouTube channel, it's called the Kennedy Report, and I post videos all the time. When will this air?
Tomorrow.
Okay, so we're about a week into Lent, but if people do want to listen to the gospel in 40 days, I'm a professional like audiobook narrator as well. So I'm actually recording all 4 gospels over 40 days, and it's available for free for people to just have something to listen to that's positive for Lent. That's on my YouTube channel and Spotify, iTunes, wherever you find your podcasts. And if anyone wants to work with me for any reason as a narrator or a speaker or a writer or whatever, they can go to kennedyhall.ca. CA is for Canada. And last thing, I am going to Italy this fall on a pilgrimage with a traditional Dominican named Father Albert Callio. And it's run by Catholic Heritage Pilgrimages. And you can find the information for that at kennedyhall.ca/Italy.
I saw that. That's great. That's great. So
I took the Tom Woods approach where he just makes a website for everything.
Yeah, that's it.
So there's an actual website, but it's just /Italy. The link is there, but it's just rather than saying like Catholic Heritage / blah 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 whatever. It's just that's where it is.
Yeah. Speaking of, you have to get on the Tom Woods show. I mean, if Charlie and I have been on it for 2 episodes, so you got
really.
That'd be you'd be an awesome guest there.
I really think he's fascinating. He was really good on COVID. I mean, he was good on COVID.
Have you read The Church and the Market?
Nope. I've read Great Facade. That's with him and Farrar.
Oh, yeah.
I know they had a falling out, but they reconciled, I guess.
They did recently. Yeah. But the Church and the Market is, I think, the best thoroughgoing defense of anarcho-capitalistic / libertarian worldview, and yet still being a faithful Catholic that I've seen. Really.
Well, hook it up. If you're friends with him, hook it up. I am always looking to talk to somebody.
All right. I'll recommend you for sure. Well, thanks, Kennedy. Charlie, you want to lead us out?
That's it.
That's
a wrap, man.
And then we got, and support Trevor Alcorn and Trinity Brewing, our sponsor.
Yep.
All right. Thanks so much, Kennedy. Peace.
That's all we
Thank
got.
you, my
God
friends.
bless.